Ramadan days.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to Ramadan nights. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never change the state of a people or a nation unless they change that within themselves. To discuss this very important verse of the Quran is with us today Sheikh Wesam Charkawi. Welcome, Sheikh.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh, this is a verse that we often hear. Our scholars, our imams often recite this verse and tell us to start with ourselves. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intend when He tells us to start the change within ourselves?
Look, before discussing the actual verse, I think we should discuss the manner and the general way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He deals with the people, even as a collective. And the scholars are quite clear here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to bestow His blessings and favor upon a people as long as they don't devalue or reject that blessing and turn away from that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden and embark upon disobedience in their life. So effectively, this verse, the ulama have said about it, the ulama of tafsir, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to grant people and allow them to sit upon or to enjoy peace and security and safety as long as they don't change. And by this meaning, as long as they don't change, as long as they don't turn away by shunning the ni'mah, by shunning the blessing and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that happens, and if they shun and they disobey, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reverse the conditions. And so you can find that calamities can come upon a people. And in this vein, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was asked, and he said, O Prophet of Allah, can calamities befall us even though there are righteous amongst us? And the Prophet said, yes, if the discord becomes rife and plentiful. So we see that absolutely calamities can befall a people on account of, if you like, the sins of others. And even scholars have said that no good thing has come about, no revolution has come about if people never had a plan to change to that which is good. It doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't bestow His favors upon human beings without them having to do any work. He certainly can. We were created and Allah blessed us and we didn't work for it. We didn't pray a single prayer and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with eyes. But the general rule is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to bless you and will not change that blessing within the people and amongst the people as long as they continue to abide by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has demanded. But if they change and the change comes from them, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change the way He deals with them in terms of His mercy and rahmah, and calamities can befall upon them. And I think as well, if you look at the lines that come before that actual verse,
yes,
Allah, He talks about the malaika, lahu mu'aqibat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the angels that are in front of you and behind you, and that yahfazunahu, they protect you. The angels have many, if you like, duties. One of those duties, as the Prophet he told us about, is not only that they give salam upon certain times, salamun hiya hatta matla' al-fajr, as Allah He mentions in the Quran, that on Laylatul Qadr you have angels that come to the people. One tafsir is that they give salam to the people. So they've got various functions. One of the functions that we see in this narration by the Prophet is that they actually infuse in the heart a countering effect to shaitan. So shaitan might be saying to do one thing, and they counter that by infusing in the heart through the permission of Allah to do the opposite. And so they have many functions. So Allah He mentions in this verse about the blessings of the duties of malaika, and then He seeks to say, Inna Allah la yughayyiru biqawmin. So then He talks about this blessing, that Allah He will continue His blessings, such as that blessing, yes, right, and others, as long as they don't change. If they change, then the reverse conditions will be manifested in that community.
Based on what you're saying, how does one sort of balance the change that he does within himself and the change that he may impact on a community or a society or even an ummah level?
And I think you've said it, the balance. It is the balance. Look, the extremes are easy. The extremes are easy. To go to one extreme, which is to do so much, and to go to the opposite extreme, which is to procrastinate, they're very easy. And the center is always the most difficult. The balance is always the most difficult. And in fact, Imam al-Razi, he said the just balance is the furthest point from the extremes. I think that's very important. And I think in this vein, I think we should remember the hadith of Hanzala when he came to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and he said, "O Prophet of Allah, He said, when I'm with you, it's like I'm seeing Jannah, I'm seeing heaven and hell. He said, but when I'm not with you, he said, these things, they slip my mind. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said to him, he said, if you were to maintain that state as you do with me, he said, the angels would have come and shook your hand
SubhanAllah.
in the road, on the road and in your beds. He said, but you can't maintain that state. In other words, and he said to Hanzala, he said, give some time for this and some time for that, some time for this and some time for that. So if you're in the mosque, remember that you have a family at home.
Yes.
And if you're with your family, remember that you also owe Allah service.
Yes.
If Allah has put you in a good position, you owe service to Allah, which is considered as one of the greatest forms of worship. So I think that balance is very important. And the ulama, the scholars, they time managed very, very well. So they would look at, they would construct and break down their day in minutes. And they wouldn't afford a minute to one thing if it was unnecessary. And I think we have to look at that today. We have to prioritize that which is important in our lives and give that balance between our faith, between community work, between ourselves, between our family. The Prophet ﷺ was dealing with the ummah.
Yes.
And he managed the best. And that's he's the perfect role model for us. That's why, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. So what the Prophet gave you, take it. And so this is definitely that balance, and that balanced approach is the way to go.
Do you think one comes before the other? So does working on the individual self come before working at a community level?
Look, absolutely. I think the self-development and self-betterment, that approach comes first and foremost. I could be engaging the broader community, but I potentially don't have the characteristical traits to be able to convey a positive picture. So that, yes, absolutely, there are those times where I do need to be concerned with myself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum," save yourself and your family. So it does start with yourself. You have to take care of yourself. So there is a point where, yes, you have to look after yourself and you have to take good care of yourself and you have to be balanced in those things that are doing in your life. But at the same token, you can't forget about engaging the broader community. 124,000 prophets, Malaz, were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, approximately 124,000 prophets, to give that call, to preach the good word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them to preach. So definitely that service, it goes without saying. And the Prophet, he referred to us, alayhi salatu wasalam, as his deputies. So we are, in effect, the Prophet's deputies. And the Prophet instilled us with a purpose. He said, Habibullah ila ibadi yuhibbukumullah. Make Allah loved to others. Make a part of who you are. Right? Mm-hmm. To go out and make Allah loved to others, and Allah will love you as a consequence. This is a very important purpose that the Prophet is attempting to put us on, that the Prophet, in fact, is encouraging us to do. Make this part of who you are. So yes, from one facet, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to look after ourselves, and there has to be a balance in our lives. But in the same vein, we cannot forget about our community. We cannot forget about the broader community. And so I think these things go hand in hand.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. I think the key word that you've mentioned there is balance. So ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the balance. We'll go to a break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking more about individual and societal change.
Ramadan days.
Ramadan is a time for giving generously to those less fortunate. Your generosity will help distribute food packs to over 20,000 families. You can feed a family of 5 for the whole month of Ramadan for just $50. With a 100% donation policy and no admin fees. Donate this Ramadan to maximize your rewards at sadaqah.org.au.
Ramadan days.
Welcome back to Ramadan Dates. In your view, what are some of the things that one can do so that they can be of benefit to their community, to their society, to the ummah?
There's no doubt that we have to engage everybody with love, respect, and compassion. And I really want to retell a story about re-engaging with love and compassion and mercy. When the bushfires in Tathra happened in New South Wales last year, one young man from the community approached me and he said, I want to go to Tathra and I want to just do a barbecue for the community out there. And he said, what do you think? I said, the idea is fantastic. And so hand in hand through the Institute, there was a number of people that went along. They took the trailer, they took 1,000 sausages, they took sweets and they took fruits and I think 2,000 bottles of water. They went to Tathra. And the whole community came out in Tathra and simply engaged with these young men who left from Sydney and cooked them a barbecue out there. After that, there was a lady who attended that event who wrote to us and said, "My father was the biggest racist person I knew. But he came that day and he spent an hour with you. And that hour, and through the simple gesture of a barbecue,
Simple Aussie barbecue,
has changed the way my father perceives others." And I thought that was absolutely profound. A barbecue, engaging with love, engaging with empathy. It really, for a society to flourish and prosper, it has to be embedded, it has to come out of empathy, where we do empathize with other people. So yes, we must engage, we have to engage others, not only amongst ourselves, but the broader community, and with love and respect and empathy. I think this is quite significant.
It's quite a profound sort of example that you've given us. But I want to ask the question, a lot of people say, I want to get involved in community work, I want to be of benefit to society, community, or the ummah as such. Is there any prerequisites that people need to have before they can engage at that level?
Absolutely there is. Look, and I think we need to go back to the prophetic example of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Before the Prophet preached a single word, before he opened his mouth, before he got up on the mountain of Safa and he said to the people, "If I were to tell you there's an army on this mountain, would you believe me?" What did they say to him? They said, "Of course. We've never known you to tell a lie. You are Al-Amin, you're truthful, you're trustworthy, you're honest." What came before the actual call or the prophetic call was actually his profound character. And so this comes before the call that each and every one of us should make. That you need to have something embedded within inside yourself.
The individual change.
The individual change. It comes back to who your character is. If people are perceiving one thing, right, we need to demonstrate absolutely that the character in which Islam calls us to is not what you perceive. It's not about that. And that's really, you look at the life of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, his whole life, right, was lived upon that platform, which basically meant that his people who persecuted him and who hated him to the extent where they attempted to assassinate him on multiple occasions, but yet there was no one more, or there was no one greater than him who they trusted, right? He was trusted the most by all of his most ardent enemies and ardent foes. And so this is quite significant. Another important detail is to be very well founded in principles of the prophetic tradition. I think this is important. And I think being well founded in principles of the prophetic tradition, this is important from the space that I may sometimes do a thing and think that it's not harmful, but in reality, it could be harmful. So I wouldn't know, whether or not that action that I'm performing is actually detrimental or it accords with the sacred law unless I have an affiliation with the sacred law. And I think this is important. And I've often made this point. There's a difference between sincerity and guidance. I might be sincere, Malaz, in terms of the things that I do, but sincerity, it does not equate to guidance. I could be sincere, but be off track.
Yes.
And say, I am sincere. Of course, that certainly can be the case. You might be sincere. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, He talks about huda, He talks about guidance. So guidance is quite different to sincerity. You might be sincere, but guidance is another facet altogether. And guidance is actually brought about through learning one's faith.
Yes, so good intentions on their own are not necessarily enough when you're sort of engaging with the wider public.
They're not enough. Good intentions are good. I mean, they're good, but they could be detrimental.
Yes.
So you need to abide, you need to basically, if you like, act within the scope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set, so you don't fall outside the boundaries. Sometimes people could fall outside those boundaries and not even be aware of it. That's why you should be very well grounded in what you're advocating. And I think that this sort of leads us to another point, which is to look at the world through the prophetic lens. And I think this is also quite important. When we grow up in life, we have various mechanisms seeking to construct that Islamic identity. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we think we're looking at the world through the Islamic identity, but actually that it doesn't accord with the prophetic lens. And the prophetic lens is very objective. It's not subjective. And when we accord ourselves through that prophetic lens, that means we're being objective. That means that we're looking at the world the way that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wanted us to look at the world through. And I'm seeing this more and more through the various different platforms that we see nowadays, whether through it's the phenomenon of social media and other types of platforms we're seeing almost a deviation or a breakdown of that prophetic lens, in other words, or that prophetic construct in how we should view this world. And more people are assuming that this is how we should be viewing the world, but it's very, very subjective. And when I ask them about some of the concepts that they think that Islam holds, they give me a very subjective view, and it's not an objective view. What Islam seeks to really to envisage or to adopt is that you look at the world through the prophetic lens. You can take the good in things, but ultimately it's how you view this world, and it has to be through that lens of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. For that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَتَاكُمْ رَسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُ. What the Prophet gave you, take it. And what he told you to abstain from it, then abstain. So everything comes back to in essence, to be filtered through that lens.
Sheikh, you mentioned that the worldview should be seen through the prophetic lens. What exactly does that mean, and how does one bring about that prophetic view of the world into his life?
Well, the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, Al-ulama warathatul anbiya, that scholars, they inherit from the prophets. But what do they inherit? They inherit knowledge. And so I think having that link and having that chain back to a scholar, where you're able to ask those questions, where if you're confused, if you're unsure, if you're not aware, if you're seeking the best course of action, that you come back to a scholar. But I think even generally, you should have that connection to a scholar, because a scholar, again, who's carried that knowledge on from prophet to scholar to scholar to scholar and so on and so forth, when you're connected and you have that connection, you're benefited by that. And so that's a protection, that's a buffer, if you like, from not deviating outside of those bounds which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set. So having those connections is quite important. You know, that example that I was saying earlier about the young man in Tathra who went out and he did the barbecue, he certainly consulted, and he consulted with myself and with others. He consulted about whether it was the right approach, whether it was an approach that how would it be seen and conveyed and how the people would take it. And so he consulted. It's very important to have these people in our lives, because these are protections in our lives. But what I also think that people should definitely attach to classes where they're learning traditional sacred law. And I say that very specifically, traditional sacred law, whereby somebody has taken studies through a reliable institution that's recognized in the world, and therefore you connect to, say, the scholar who's graduated from that institution. And this avoids people who maybe advocate that they have basically studied somewhere, whereas in reality they have not. So, you know, we connect to those institutions, we connect to those scholars, we learn the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and there's no shortage of books that have been written about the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And so when we embody the Prophet's life into our lives, you know, who should be, if you ask any youngster today, who is your hero and who should be your hero? I mean, often we get various responses, but...
Avengers.
Yeah, well, for some, unfortunately, it is superheroes and whatnot, because they haven't really discovered, if you like, the man Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, who was an extraordinary man and the greatest of men and the greatest person who was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who on the Day of Judgment, who says, I am the greatest I am Sayyidi wala Adam, I am the best of the sons of Adam, and I say this without pride. So we live in a world today where we cannot be aside or divorced from learning the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but also taking it from somebody who's also having studied the seerah with somebody else, and then embodying that into our lives. And then we take these characteristics, we build these characteristics in our lives. So when we talk about prophetic lens, we're actually talking about embodying the prophetic tradition and the prophetic, if you like, speech and the prophetic actions and the prophetic, if you like, viewpoint in our world. And so that becomes manifest in our world, how the Prophet acted, what he said, how he viewed this world, the hum and worry that he had for this world. We embody that. And that becomes manifest in our actions. That becomes who we are. That becomes our sense of purpose. We worry like he worried. We act like he acted. We speak like he spoke. And so this becomes the embodiment of the Prophet. So again, going back to those scholars who had that link to the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam.
Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all and allow us to embody this prophetic lens. Another question I want to ask you is there any instances that you can think of where someone should solely focus on themselves and leave out any sort of community, societal work. What's your advice in that aspect?
There are certainly some instances where some people should focus on themselves, but I want to mention in that regard that service to God and service to people in order to please God is from amongst the greatest of worship that we can do in reality. And I think this needs to be who we are as beings upon this earth. We don't have long here, and this world is temporary, absolutely. But I also want to say in that same vein, Sayyid al-Buti, who actually wrote a very excellent biography of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he speaks about his father. And he says, when I was young, my father paid for my tuition. And he told me not to focus on anything else until I had graduated from my school. So in that sense, Ibn Ata'illah, he says that there are times in your life when you have to deal with the circumstances in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put you. If you look at Sayyid al-Buti's life, for that 10 years or for that 20 years in which he studied, his parents seen the bigger vision. He had to focus on himself. He had to focus on the acquisition of that knowledge. But you look today, he wrote over 60 books, which are studied in practically every institution today upon the path of becoming a scholar. So there are times where we should have that focus to the self rather than to the community. But because we have to deal with the circumstances as they are put before us. And there are some circumstances where we get to concentrate on ourselves, where we get to have that alone time. This certainly is the case. You may have in society where the society affects us. And sometimes we are affected adversely. Negatively. And so part of the healing, or part of the, if you like, the medicine for such an individual is maybe to separate themselves for a little while. Maybe to
focus on themselves.
Maybe to focus on themselves, to put themselves beneath the hand of a coach, of a sheikh for a little while, where they embark upon acquiring those beautiful traits or that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are absolutely times in one's life where that may very well be necessary. We see in the time when the companion asked the Prophet alayhi salatu salam, what about if we're in a time where disobedience is rampant and in essence we can't get away from it?
Yes.
What did the Prophet say alayhi salatu salam? Be at distance, relocate, move. And so on the one hand, certainly we have to engage. But on the other hand, there may certainly be instances where we have to isolate and be away from certain facets.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Wessam, for your wonderful sort of words of advice. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to work in the month of Ramadan on ourselves, and to also allow us to serve humanity as well to the best of our ability. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ramadan day.